Good evening. My name is Takeshi Furumoto, but everybody calls me Tak. I'm a survivor of Two Lake segregation camp and decorated and disabled Vietnam vet. I'd like to thank Tiara Club and Reno Aise for giving me an opportunity to share our family and my story about racial discrimination in this country before, during, and after World War II. In February 19, 1942, President Roosevelt passed Executive Order 9066, which imprisoned innocent Japanese Americans and Japanese nationals in West Coast, California, Oregon, and Washington State to American concentration camps throughout the remote areas of the United States. This was done without any due process. When the Civil Liberties Act of 1988 was signed by President Reagan, and in his own words, he said it was due to the racial discrimination. And it took another 25 years for the U.S. Supreme Court to rule Executive Order 9066 unconstitutional. Today, after tumultuous 4 years under President Trump, we are seeing the rebirth of more racial discrimination in America after 78 years. It is our duty as Americans to preserve racial equality and to preserve our civil liberties and Constitution. This evening, I'd like to share our family, my experience to overcome this, to best of our abilities, and what we are doing to fight the racial discrimination so that another American of any other ethnicity will not face the same fate as we did in American soil. Let me first read the apology letter I received from President Clinton, October 1st, 1993, 5 years after the Civil Liberties Act of 1988 was signed. This is in a nutshell the story I am about to share with you this evening. The apology letter reads, the White House, Washington, October 1st, 1993. It took 5 years from President Reagan to President Bush Sr. to President Clinton to complete this mission. Over 50 years ago, the United States government unjustly in turn evacuated or relocated you and many other Japanese Americans. Today, on behalf of your fellow Americans, I offer a sincere apology to you for the actions that unfairly denied Japanese Americans and their families fundamental liberties during the World War II. In passing the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, we acknowledge the wrongs of the past and offer redress to those who endure such grave injustice. In retrospect, we understand the nation's action were rooted deeply in racial prejudice, wartime hysteria, and lack of political leadership. We must learn from the past and dedicate ourselves as a nation to renewing the spirit of equality and our love of freedom. Together, we can guarantee a future with liberty and justice for all. You and your family have my best wishes for the future. Bill Clinton. Unfortunately, more than 50% of internees were not able to witness this apology letter, nor receive $20,000 monetary compensation, including my parents who have passed away in 1972 and 1983. Now I'd like to share our family history before, during, and after World War II. I'm a son of migrant farm worker. My father came to this country when he was 13 years old from Hiroshima, Japan. Right after the Spanish flu pandemic, 1921. He attended school in Florin, California, adjacent to Sacramento capital. The school was segregated. He only had 8th grade education. My mother was born in Cudahy, California, close to Long Beach, California, to a cantaloupe farmer from Hiroshima, Japan, in 1912. She was an American citizen. In February 19, 1942, President Roosevelt passed Executive Order 9066. My parents and my 4 older sisters, 10, 9, 6, and 4 years old, were forcibly incarcerated without any due process, given 10 days notice, and 1 carry-on suitcase per person to American concentration camp. They lived in East Los Angeles at that time. The first destination was at Santa Anita Racetrack for 6 months, while the 10 incarceration camps were built throughout the United States in the remote areas. The first camp they went to was Lower Arkansas. It was a 3-day train ride from Los Angeles to Lower Arkansas with shades down to make sure it was inconspicuous to the American public. The second and the final camp that our family went was Turtle Lake Segregation Camp. And this was called Disloyal Camp because on spring of 1943, the U.S. government passed a loyalty question, and especially question 27 and 28 were very unfair questions. And 27 says that, would you defend this country faithfully? And our parents says no. And 28, would you disavow Emperor of Japan? And my parents said no. Of course, 27, with 4 kids locked up in the camp, they would not go volunteering in the army. And 28, at that time, our grandparents, both my father's and my mother's side, had lived in Hiroshima, Japan. If they had disavowed Emperor of Japan, they would never see them again. Our family and I were released in December of 1945. Our family decided to go back to Hiroshima, Japan, where our grandparents were victims of atomic bombing. Their houses were in Dambara and Ishihara, 1 and 5 miles from the epicenter of atomic bomb. We were shipped back by USS Gordon, U.S. Army transport ship from Portland, Oregon to Yokosuka, Japan. It was a tacit deportation. My parents were not allowed to return to the United States. My mother was an American citizen. Her citizenship was taken away. But we found a loophole to come back to the USA. When my older sister, Mary, turned 21, she was able to recall her parents back to USA. It took from 1952 to 1956 for our entire family to reunite in the United States. We lived in South Central Los Angeles. We were not able to live where we wanted to. We were steered to non-white or undesirable areas. But like many immigrants in the United States, our parents work hard so we can get an education, so we can dream the American dream. Dream we did, despite the obstacles. One of my sisters became a doctor, another high school teacher, another beautician. And I became an officer in the United States Army. And today, my wife Carolyn and I are still running 47-year-old Furumoto Realty in Fort Lee, Manhattan, and Westchester. And my older sister Mary, who brought us back to the United States, helped to build the business. In recent years, Carolyn and I are trying to bring Fred Korematsu Day of Civil Liberties and Constitution to the forefront of America. This year, on January 30, we celebrate the second year Fred Korematsu Day in borough of Fort Lee, place where I lived and thrived after I came back from Vietnam, decorated but disabled, serving this country. This is the time when my wife Carolyn helped me nurse through my PTSD, supported me when I was having a difficult time. I owe her much gratitude. The mayor and council passed and proclaimed Fred Korematsu Day on January 16th last year, and now we are very close to passing the Fred Korematsu Day in the state of New Jersey. With the United States going through the healing process after tumultuous 4 years, the civil liberties and Constitution become vital, so we can learn from the past and become watchdog for our future, so another American will not face the same fate as we did. Carolyn and I would like to take Fred Korematsu Day of Civil Liberties and Constitution nationally to preserve civil liberties in our Constitution. And if you're wondering why I'm wearing my Vietnam fatigue, it is to show my utmost respect to the Japanese American soldiers who volunteered in the United States Army and became the most decorated unit in the entire history of the United States, the 442nd Regimental Unit. Despite their families being imprisoned in the American incarceration camp. I quote from President Truman, they not only fought the war, but they fought racial prejudice. They were truly American and defended our country. I too served in this country in Vietnam, and I understand what they went through. And I am so proud to have predecessors like them. That is why I'm wearing my uniform. Again, I'd like to thank Tiara Club and Reno for giving me an opportunity to share our family and my story about racial discrimination. But we are all Americans striving to make this country better, so all of us can share our common heritage. Thank you.
古本さんとティアラグループの愛瀬里乃さんの間で質疑応答を行います。
Have you ever experienced a hate crime or bashing due to race?
Yes, my experience happened 30 years ago when there was a Japanese bashing. Today, it is a Chinese bashing because President Trump mentioned that it was China Corona. In 1990s, when this thing happened, it was because the Japanese had become second in power of economy, and they had stopped buying United States, for example, Rockefeller Center golf courses, Pebble Beach golf course, and stuff like that. And the Japanese bashing has started. And during those days, I was involved with some of the sales in Manhattan. And from time to time, mass media used to contact me. At that time, New York Times were covering a story on Rockefeller Center purchase. And at that time, they asked me, there's a Japanese bashing going on. Have you been involved in some of the hate crimes or bashing? And the night before, we had a visitor from Japan. He was a president, or he was in charge of a Nissan in East Coast. And he used to live near our house, and he visited us. And together with my next door neighbor and other neighbor, two Hakujin couples, and Mr. Maeda, myself and my wife went to a restaurant. And at that time, there were a older couple, watching us with disdain look. And at the end, they were waiting for us in the parking lot. And I had to go pick up my car. So I went to the parking lot. They were waiting for me. And he says, "Hey, are you Japanese?" I said, "I'm American." Well, Jap is a Jap. They're all the same. I said, "Well, I'm American. I'm Japanese descent. I even served in Vietnam, and what's wrong with you?" But he says, "You Japanese are buying up the entire United States," and he said, "Jap is a Jap," and he tried to start a fight, but somehow I kind of stay away. And then my other friends from the neighbors came, and I told them, these people are trying to cause trouble. But somehow this incident was picked up in New York Times, and it got the front page. And somehow Oprah Winfrey picked this up. And at that time, Oprah Winfrey, well, she's very famous now too. She had a very popular show that was national at 4 p.m. And I was invited to their show together with one of the Japanese American general, General Mukoyama. He was the first Japanese American general who commanded the Army Division. And Dennis Hayashi, he was the JACL, Japanese American Citizen League national president. So three of us were interviewed, and we talked about this hate crime and how this happened, and this incident really hit the mass media. So I thought, well, maybe today it would be very interesting to show how this thing starts, just like the China bashing, because President Trump had mentioned that it was a China corona. So it's something like this that really starts the incident, and it's not really very good. So I have other experiences, but I'll talk about that a little later, such as the military and so forth. But I thought I would share this story with you today.
Thank you. Next question is, who was Mr. Fred Korematsu?
Fred Korematsu. I'm sorry, on my previous speech, I mentioned about Fred Korematsu, a Day of Civil Liberties and Constitution, but I really did not explain who he was. He's one of the three gentlemen during the World War II, when the rest of the Japanese Americans, including our family, were incarcerated in different camps. These three gentlemen, including Fred Korematsu, Gordon Hirabayashi, and Minoru Yasui, they defied the Executive Order 9066, which in turn or the Japanese Americans without due process. And they were locked up until the duration of the World War II. And after the World War II, they kept on fighting this all the way to the Supreme Court, but they lost the case. But again, they kept on trying for another 40 years. And finally, in 1982, the federal court, not the Supreme Court, had, even though they were convicted on the criminal charges, they pardoned them. In part because the information that they used to intern Japanese Americans was a lie, which Aiko Herzaku Yoshinaga has found the information in Washington, D.C. when she was working as a clerk. And this information was released, and all the Japanese American activists, we followed this, went all the way to the courts, but Supreme Court never did pardon them. But the point I'm trying to make is that this incident led to the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, which I read at the outset of my speech. And I thought Fred Korematsu, who was really brave enough to fight this, even though he fought it for 40 years, he was not able to witness the Supreme Court, which after 75 years declared the Executive Order 9066 unconstitutional. But I just wanted to kind of mention this about the Fred Korematsu, which I failed to do during my regular speech. I hope I clear myself who he is, but he's a very important person. It was like a symbol for us, just like Martin Luther King, who's we share, we have this the day on January for his efforts.
Thank you. Next question is, was there a particular day that you dreaded because of Japanese bashing or discrimination?
Yes, I came back to the United States when I was 11 and a half years old. Family came back from 1952 to 1956, but I came back in 1956. I was 11 and a half years old, and I went to elementary school. During those days, whenever Pearl Harbor Day comes up, of course, the mass media picks up television, newspapers, and they would, all my friends would call me, "You're a Jap, you guys did that." And I mean, I wanted to find a hole and hide. And so I dreaded that particular day because for no reason, I mean, I didn't do anything, but we got blamed for it. But situation like this didn't happen. But even to this day, whenever the Pearl Harbor Day comes, I mean, the mass media, covers it, and they mention the Japanese. So I've enjoyed that day even today.
Thank you. Next question is, was there racial discrimination in the military?
I like to talk about my experience in the military and also in Vietnam. But before I do that, there was a very serious case which went all the way to the courts. Let me just read this. This happened in 1980s, and his name is Bruce Yamashita. Let me just read this mini article. Bruce Yamashita just wanted to serve his country, so he entered Marine Corps Officer Candidate School, but because of his race and ethnicity, he was denied a chance to serve. Instead of giving in, he waged lonely 5-year battle against discrimination in the Marine Corps, uncovered evidence that rocked the Corps. By standing for equal opportunity, fairness, and justice, fundamental principle of democracy, he served patriotism's highest calling, challenged the nation's powerful institution, emerged as most unlikely hero. I too went to officer candidate school about 15 years prior. His incident happened in 1980s. I was in the Army OCS. I wasn't kicked out of the Army or anything. Before you could graduate, we have to go through 3 semesters, first, second, third. And my situation back in 1969, when I was going to OCS, myself and this black kid was recycled, which means that we failed. I mean, we passed first 2 semesters, but when we were ready to be commissioned, we were not admitted. But I was recycled. I said, I really wanted to quit, but I just kept on going. And I did finish my OCS, and I had to spend extra 2 months to repeat the final semester. But I don't know if this was due to discrimination or not, because I mean, for as academics, I mean, I graduated from UCLA, so I didn't really have problem with that. And as far as the physical stamina, I did play baseball in high school and ran track, so physically I had no problem. Leadership wise, and when I was in elementary school and junior high school, I was a class president and so forth. I even ran for the student body president in elementary school. But I don't know if this was discrimination or not. But this similar thing did happen to me, but I was not kicked out, and I did graduate. I did become an officer in the United States Army. So there is a discrimination in the Army. And when I was in Vietnam, this is the first war that the blacks and Caucasians fought together. For the Japanese Americans, I mean, we're segregated during World War II. And during Korean War, finally, the Japanese Americans were able to fight together with the Caucasians. But in Vietnam, the blacks were the first time that they fought together with the Caucasians. And I know that because I grew up in South Central LA, which was predominantly black, and I got to know black pretty well. So I was friends with them, and whenever there's a clique made, I would stay with them. There was resentment. However, being an officer, I have the last say because I was able to grade. In other words, that we do the efficiency report, which means for the enlisted men, people who work for me, it's like a report card. If they misbehave, I mean, they don't get promotion. So in certain respect, I had their respect. However, there were resentment because I was Asian American and I was their boss, being an officer. But I thought I would like to mention that in Vietnam, in the military.
Thank you. Last question is, how would you minimize hate crime?
You have to be proactive. You have to be in front line and trying to, combat this, but it's very difficult. But for example, today, your club, Tiara, is having a topic of discrimination. I think it's important to bring this topic up, talk about it. I think it's also important to lecture about this. Also, I think that it's very important for the school to have a special education on the matter of racial discrimination, because this does happen in the United States. I remember going in Japan at the time that President Obama went to Hiroshima. That was almost 5 years ago. I went back to my elementary school, Gion Elementary School in Hiroshima, and I had asked the principal to let me talk about peace and war to my alumni. And so he let me talk about peace and war. And at that time in Hiroshima, they had the Heiwa Gakushu class, peace class, where 5th and 6th graders were learning about peace and world wars and so forth. And but I found out that when I was giving speech, and at the end, we're talking about, we had the question and answers. And these kids were pretty, very proactive, asking about peace and so forth. And I remember one student says, Mr. Furumoto, how can we, start peace? I said, I returned the question right at him. He says, I think it's pretty easy. This kid sitting right next to me, I put arms around him and says, hey, let's be friends. And that's how peace starts. But I think education is very paramount in something like this, and really have to be proactive. recognition days such as Martin Luther King Day or Fred Korematsu Day, about recognition of the racial discrimination does exist, and we should eliminate something like this. It's very important. So those are the things that we could do to minimize it. I don't think we could eliminate it, we could minimize it.
Mr. Furumoto, thank you very much for sharing your story.
Thank you very much for giving me opportunity to share this story. Thank you.